What rule did your teacher break? I was in music class when I felt that familiar tingling in my fingers. I'd been seizure-free for 3 months, but I knew what was coming. Miss Blackwood, I need to get to the nurse, I said, already feeling the electricity building in my brain. I'm about to have a seizure. The substitute teacher rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Every kid suddenly has epilepsy now. It's trendy. No, you don't understand. The tingling was spreading up my arm. I had maybe 2 minutes before I'd lose consciousness. I have a seizure action plan in my file. Sit down. She stood up and walked to my desk. But instead of helping, she leaned over me. You know what my sister did when her daughter claimed to have seizures? She ignored them completely. Within a week, miraculously cured, Emily jumped up and ran toward the emergency button by the door. She's not faking. I've seen her seizures before. The sub blocked her. The only thing seizing is her need for attention. Then she did something I'll never forget. She walked to the door, turned the deadbolt, and dropped the key in her pocket. Nobody leaves until she admits she's faking. This victim complex is destroying your generation. Call 911, someone yelled, reaching for their phone. Phone's in the box now? The sub grabbed the collection box. Or you're all suspended. My vision was starting to blur at the edges. 2 minutes. That's all I had before my brain would misfire completely. The number my neurologist made me memorize. That's when my hated cousin Walsh decided to open his mouth. She used to fake seizures ever since she was little. The sub's face lit up. See, even her boyfriend knows she's performing. She walked back to the smartboard and pulled up YouTube. You know what really helps with fake seizures? She searched for flashing strobe light, 10 hours, and hit play. Exposure therapy. If you were really epileptic, I wouldn't do this. But since you're faking, the screen exploded with rapid flashing. White, black, white, black. My brain felt like it was being electrocuted. Emily screamed, "Turn it off!" Photosensitive epilepsy is real. The sub cranked the brightness to max. Psychosomatic reaction. She believes she's seizing, so her body mimics it. That's when David grabbed his head. I guess he had photosensitive epilepsy too, because his whole body went rigid. I can't. The lights? Everyone lost it. Kids were diving under desks, throwing jackets over their heads. Turn it off. Turn it off. Malik was trying to cover my eyes with his hands. Please don't seize, please don't seize. Ryan ran to the door and started slamming his shoulder into it. Help! Somebody help! The sub laughed. Sit down or you're expelled. 3 other kids were now on the floor. The strobing was triggering something in everyone. Migraines, nausea, panic. Make it stop. Jenna was crying, hands pressed to her temples. Through the door window, Mr. Peter from next door looked in. The sub stepped in front of the window, blocking his view of the chaos, and gave a thumbs up before pulling down the shade. He walked away. This is torture. Emily screamed, 1 minute left! I could feel my consciousness slipping. My muscles were already starting to twitch. The sub actually turned the speed up on the strobe. When I was in school, nobody had seizures. Now suddenly, everyone's neurodivergent. Thanks, social media. My body wasn't mine anymore. The seizure hit like a lightning bolt. Sarah told me later that's when things got really bad. My seizure was violent, thrashing, foaming, turning blue. She tried to turn me on my side, but I was convulsing too hard. She's dying! Sarah screamed, my blood on her hands from where I'd bitten my tongue. The sub stood there eating an apple. Oscar-worthy performance, though the fake blood is a bit much. That's when Billy lost it. This sweet, quiet kid who never caused trouble. He grabbed a music stand like a battering ram. Violence? Really? The sub pulled out her phone to record. This is going straight to the principal. He swung at the smartboard. Crack. The screen went black. Destruction of property, she shrieked. That's a felony. But Billy didn't stop. He turned and smashed the door window. Glass everywhere. David was having his own seizure 3 F'd away. Jenna vomiting from the strobe exposure. Complete chaos. Assault. You're all going to jail. That's when my boyfriend Darren saw me through the broken window and completely lost it. He reached through, slicing his hand on the glass, fumbling for the lock. Don't you dare! The sub screamed, but Emily and Billy held her back. The door flew open. Teachers came flooding in. Call 911, someone screamed. Multiple students seizing. The sub was still yelling as they restrained her. They're all faking. This is mass hysteria. The paramedic said I was clinically dead for 90 seconds. They had to intubate me right there in the hallway while working on David 10T away. Turns out he had undiagnosed epilepsy. Miss Blackwood was given paid time off while her performance was under review. A few of the parents worked to set up a GoFundMe to cover treatment costs. Fast forward 2 weeks later, and we were sitting in science class when they broke the news. David's parents only managed to raise $30,000 of the $130,000 needed for treatment. He didn't make it. That's when I knew we had to take matters into our own hands and destroy Miss Blackwood. My hands were shaking so bad, I couldn't hold my pencil. The teacher kept talking about cell division. But all I could think about was how David's cells stopped dividing because his parents couldn't afford to keep them going. I sat there frozen, while everyone else took notes like nothing happened. Like David wasn't dead. Like Miss Blackwood wasn't sitting at home getting paid while he was in the ground. The rage was so hot in my chest, I thought I might throw up right there at my desk. When the bell rang, I ran to the bathroom and barely made it to the toilet before everything came up. Emily followed me in and held my hair back while I heaved. She kept whispering that we couldn't let Miss Blackwood get away with this. I knew she was right, but I could barely stand up straight. My legs were shaking and my head was pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I just laid there staring at the ceiling and replaying those 90 seconds when I was dead. The darkness, the nothing. I kept wondering if David felt that same darkness, or if it was different for him. My parents kept checking on me every hour because they were scared the stress would trigger another seizure. Mom would peek in and ask if I needed anything, and Dad would stand in the doorway just watching me breathe. The next morning at the school, there were flowers and cards piling up at David's locker. Someone had taped his school picture to the door, and people were leaving notes and stuffed animals. This freshman girl walked by and asked what happened. When someone told her about the seizure in music class, she actually said it sounded made up. I wanted to scream at her, but I just stood there staring at all the flowers. At lunch, I found Billy sitting alone at a table in the corner. His knuckles were still wrapped in bandages from when he punched through the smartboard. He looked up when I sat down, and I could see he hadn't been sleeping either. He told me he couldn't stop seeing David on the floor. We just sat there in silence because there wasn't anything to say that would help. Nothing would bring David back. After school, Darren was waiting by my locker with a stack of printed papers. He'd found Miss Blackwood's social media accounts before she made them private. Post after post going back years, where she mocked kids with disabilities. She called them trendy. She praised her sister's tough love approach to her daughter's fake seizures. There were pictures of her at some conference about combating victim mentality in schools. Every post made me want to throw up again. David's funeral was 3 days later. The church was packed, and his mom Nev sat in the front row looking like she hadn't eaten or slept since it happened. When I went up to pay my respects, she grabbed my hand so tight it hurt. She kept whispering about the GoFundMe messages and how people kept saying they were sorry, but $30,000 wasn't enough. Her grip was crushing my fingers, but I didn't pull away. She needed someone to hold on to. After the service, I saw Walsh in the parking lot, and I couldn't help myself. I walked right up to him and asked how he could do it, how he could tell that substitute I was faking when he knew about my epilepsy. He started crying right there by his car. He said our grandmother always told him I was faking for attention, and he believed her because it was easier than accepting I was really sick. He said he was sorry, but sorry didn't bring David back. Monday morning, Principal Penn called me to her office with my parents. She sat there behind her big desk, offering these careful condolences and talking about proper procedures. She kept emphasizing how the school followed protocol and how substitute teachers go through training. She never once admitted that those procedures failed David. She never said his name without looking at her lawyer on the phone. My parents were trying to stay calm, but I could see Dad's jaw clenching every time she mentioned procedures. After that meeting, they sent me to see Ren Wigley, who was the district's 504 coordinator. They sat there with my file open, and this fake sympathy on their face while they reviewed my accommodation plan. They kept asking if there was anything they could have done differently. Like, David wasn't literally dead from what they did. They wanted me to say it was okay, that the system worked, but the system killed David, and they wanted me to pretend it didn't. I sat there listening to them talk about updated training and new protocols, while all I could think about was David seizing on that floor. Something feels really strange about how Miss Blackwood knew exactly which buttons to push. The strobe lights, the locked door, even calling epilepsy trendy. It's like she had this whole plan ready to go for some reason. The way his body went rigid, the way his eyes rolled back, the way the substitute stood there eating her apple while he was dying. They kept talking about moving forward and learning from this tragedy, but they never said what they learned. They never said they were wrong. They never said David should still be alive. When I left that office, I knew nothing would change unless we made it change. Miss Blackwood would come back from her paid leave, and some other kid would die. The school would have more meetings about procedures and protocols, but nothing would actually get better. That's when Emily and Billy and Darren and I started planning. We weren't going to let them sweep this under the rug like David never existed. The first thing we did was go to the police station downtown. My mom drove us there in her minivan, while Emily kept checking her phone for updates from the other parents. The building smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. We sat in those hard plastic chairs for 2 hours before the detective finally called us in. He had this thick folder on his desk with David's name on the tab. I could see the corner of his death certificate sticking out. The detective kept saying things like, alleged incident, and under investigation, while that piece of paper sat right there. He told us these cases take time, and there's a process they have to follow. My mom asked when we'd hear something definite. He just shrugged and said it could be weeks or months. Emily's mom started crying. The detective handed her a tissue box and said he understood our frustration, but they had to be thorough. He kept using the word alleged, even though David was dead. Even though we all saw what happened. Even though the paramedics had reports, he said the district was conducting their own investigation too. Everything was under review. That's all he would say. Under review. Days later, I had to go to the mall with my mom to get new shoes. The food court lights were those old fluorescent ones that buzz and flicker. I didn't think about it until we walked past Orange Julius. Then the lights started doing that thing where they pulse. My chest got tight. My hands started shaking. The lights kept flickering, and suddenly I was back in that classroom. I dropped to the floor right there by the pretzel stand. People were staring. Some kid was recording on his phone. Security came running over. They thought I was on drugs or something. My mom kept trying to explain, but I couldn't breathe. The lights kept flickering. They had to help me out through the employee exit. Everyone was watching, whispering. I felt so weak, so broken. The next Monday at the school, this girl from the newspaper came up to me. She had her recorder out and everything. Said she wanted to do a story about what happened. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, every single detail about Miss Blackwood. But I also knew how these things go. One wrong word, and suddenly the story becomes about something else. Or the school makes me look like I'm making it up, or they twist it around. I told her I couldn't talk about it yet. She kept pushing. Said people deserve to know the truth. Maybe she was right, but I wasn't ready. That weekend, I stayed in my room organizing everything. I pulled out my seizure action plan that the school was supposed to follow. Found all my hospital records from the past 3 years, the emails my parents sent at the beginning of the year explaining my condition, the letter from my neurologist. Each piece of paper felt important, like evidence, like proof that this shouldn't have happened. I made copies of everything. Put them in a binder with tabs. My mom helped me scan them too. We saved everything on 3 different flash drives just in case. While I was organizing, I kept checking David's GoFundMe page. Still stuck at $30,000. His parents needed $130,000 for all the medical bills before he died. The comments had stopped coming. People had moved on to other things. That's how it works. Something terrible happens and everyone cares for a week, then they forget. Kids die because their families can't afford treatment. That's just how things are. The anger was eating me up inside, making me feel sick all the time. On Sunday, Emily and Billy came over with Malik. We sat in my basement trying to figure out what to do. Darren showed up late and sat on the stairs instead of with us. He kept checking his phone. Finally, Emily asked what his problem was. He said his coach told him not to get involved, said it could mess up his scholarship chances. That hurt more than I expected. He was supposed to be on our side. He was supposed to care about David, about me, but his stupid football scholarship was more important. Emily said we should file public records requests. Her older sister did that once for a school project. We spent hours writing the requests, asking for the 911 call recordings, any security camera footage from the hallway, the incident reports. We sent them to the district office that week. They wrote back saying everything was part of an ongoing investigation. Said they couldn't release anything due to student privacy laws. It felt like a cover-up, like they were hiding something. That's when Emily's mom mentioned she knew a lawyer. This woman named Orla Purcell, who did civil rights cases. She agreed to meet with us at her office downtown. The place had all these awards on the walls, pictures of her with important people. She listened to our whole story without interrupting once. Then she said she'd help us pro bono, if we could get organized. She needed evidence, witness statements, documentation, everything properly preserved. She gave us really specific instructions. Screenshot any social media posts about the incident before they get deleted. Write down everything we remember while it's still fresh. Get contact information for every witness, but absolutely no contact with Miss Blackwood. No messages, no confrontations, nothing that could be seen as harassment. The rules felt limiting, but having a plan helped. It made me feel less helpless, less like I was drowning. We made a group chat that night to coordinate everything. Emily would handle collecting witness statements from our classmates. Billy would track down and organize all the documents. Malik would create a timeline of everything that happened. Everyone had a job. Everyone had something to focus on, instead of just being angry. It felt like we were actually doing something, like we weren't just going to let them sweep this away. The next morning, Principal Penn's voice crackled over the PA system during homeroom, and everyone stopped writing to listen. She cleared her throat twice before speaking, and I could tell from her tone she was reading from something prepared. Any student participating in walkouts or protests during school hours would face automatic suspension and removal from all extracurricular activities effective immediately. The room went silent and I saw kids exchanging looks across the aisles. My hands started shaking because I knew what this meant for our plans. We'd been talking about organizing something bigger than just collecting evidence, and now they were trying to scare us into staying. Quiet. The announcement went on for another minute about maintaining order and respecting the learning environment. But I stopped listening and started texting under my desk. Within 5 minutes, our group chat had 40 messages all saying the same thing. We were doing it anyway. Third period was when we planned it, and nothing was going to stop us now. Not after what happened to David. The bell rang, and I grabbed my stuff and headed to English, trying to look normal, even though my heart was pounding. In the hallway, I passed 3 security guards I'd never seen before standing by the main entrance. They were watching everyone and writing things down on clipboards. 2 more were stationed by the side exits. The message was clear, but it just made me angrier. Second period dragged on forever, and I kept checking the clock every 2 minutes. The teacher was talking about symbolism in some book, but I couldn't focus on anything except what was about to happen. Finally, the bell rang for third period, and I stood up with everyone else. But instead of going to class, I turned toward the main entrance. Emily was already there with Illy and Malik and about 10 other kids. More were coming down the hallway from different directions. The security guard stepped forward, blocking the doors, but we kept walking. One of them started saying something about consequences, but 40 kids pushing forward was more than 3 guards could handle. We pushed through the doors and out into the parking lot where more students were already gathering. Some teachers stood in their doorways watching, but nobody tried to stop us. A few even nodded slightly as we passed. We walked to the front lawn and stood there in a group, not chanting or holding signs, just standing together in silence for David. Cars driving by started honking, and some people took pictures with their phones. After 20 minutes, we walked back inside and went to our classes like nothing happened. By the end of the day, there were yellow detention slips stuffed in all our lockers with dates and times written in red pen. Mine was for every day after school for 2 weeks. That night, Walsh decided to make everything worse by posting an old video on social media from a family barbecue 3 years ago. In the video, I was laughing at something my uncle said and playing cornhole in the backyard, looking completely normal and happy. He captioned it saying, "This proved I'd always been fine, and just played up my condition for attention when it was convenient." The betrayal hit harder than anything because he was using our shared memories as weapons. He knew that video was from a good day between seizures, but he made it look like evidence I was faking. I'm curious why the detective kept using alleged when there's a death certificate right there on his desk. What exactly needs more investigation when someone's already gone? The way David's parents need $130,000 for medical bills, while the school gives Miss Blackwood paid leave, feels like there's something really twisted about these priorities. Within an hour, it had 200 shares, and the comments were brutal. People calling me a liar, and saying David's death was my fault for creating drama. I threw my phone across the room and heard the screen crack against the wall. The next morning, Darren found Walsh by his locker before first period, and I heard about it from 3 different people before I even got to the school. Darren grabbed Walsh's shirt and slammed him back into the metal lockers hard enough that everyone in the hallway heard it. Walsh tried to say something, but Darren shoved him again, and his head hit the combination lock on the locker behind him. 2 teachers came running and pulled them apart. But not before Darren got one more push in that sent Walsh's books flying everywhere. They both got marched to the office, and by lunch, they both had 3-day suspensions. Darren's mom had to leave work to pick him up, and I felt sick knowing his protective instinct was costing him his education. He texted me that night saying it was worth it, but I knew his parents were furious. 3 days later, I finally agreed to do the interview with a student journalist after saying no 5 times. We met in an empty classroom after school, and I set clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss. No questions about my family or medical history before the incident. No speculation about blame, just facts about what happened that day. My voice shook the entire time, and I had to stop twice to drink water because my mouth went completely dry. She asked about the strobe lights, and I described the feeling of my brain misfiring. She asked about the locked door, and I explained how trapped we felt. She asked about David, and I couldn't speak for almost a minute. When it was over, I felt empty and exhausted, but at least I'd said it out loud to someone who would write it down. The article went online that night on the school paper website, and within 2 hours, the comment section exploded. Half the people supported us and shared their own stories about teachers ignoring medical conditions. The other half called us hysterical attention seekers, looking for someone to blame for a tragedy. One comment said David's death was just unfortunate timing, and we were using it to attack a good teacher. Another said we were drama queens, making everything about ourselves. Reading strangers debate whether David's death was preventable made me run to the bathroom and throw up. My mom found me on the bathroom floor 20 minutes later, sobbing. The next day, Orla called my mom with unexpected news. One of the paramedics who worked on me that day had reached out through her law office wanting to help. He couldn't speak publicly because his employer had strict policies about discussing cases. But he said if formally subpoenaed, he would provide a statement about what he saw. He remembered everything, including how long it took to revive me and the state of the classroom when they arrived. His testimony could prove how serious the situation really was. 2 days later, we got the transcript from Mr. Peters' deposition, and it made everything worse. He claimed he saw nothing concerning when he looked through the door window that day, just Miss Blackwood giving him a thumbs up, so he assumed everything was fine and kept walking. He said the shade was already down when he looked, and he had no reason to think students were in distress. Reading that he could have saved us, but didn't even notice made me lose faith in every adult who was supposed to protect us. He was 20 FT away while we were dying, and he just walked past. That same afternoon, Malik found something incredible online. Miss Blackwood had an old blog from 5 years ago that she'd forgotten to delete, and he'd been searching for hours until he found it. Post after post ranting about neurodivergent kids being coddled and creating victim culture in schools. 1. Entry said seizure disorders were overdiagnosed and most kids just wanted attention and special treatment. Another said parents enabled fake medical conditions to excuse poor behavior. We screenshot everything before she could delete it and added it to our evidence folder that was getting thicker every day. Aura sent formal preservation letters to the district and the smartboard manufacturer, the next morning demanding they maintain all electronic logs from that classroom. The legal language made everything feel more real and serious than our group chat planning ever did. The next morning, a letter appeared in every student mailbox with the teachers' union logo at the top. Di Paxton had typed up 3 pages of legal threats about what would happen if any student posted Miss Blackwood's name online. The words defamation and Lil and civil lawsuit jumped out at me as I read it in the hallway. Kids were passing copies around, and some were already deleting their social media posts from the night before. I watched 2 freshmen actually crying as they read about personal liability and permanent records. Emily grabbed my copy and ripped it in half right there in front of everyone. The anger spread through the hallway like wildfire as more kids realized we were being threatened for telling the truth. My mom had to pick me up early that day for a grocery run, and I thought I'd be fine. The self-checkout machine started flashing red when the barcode wouldn't scan, and my whole body went rigid. The strobe pattern hit my brain like a hammer, and suddenly I couldn't remember where I was. My legs turned to jelly, and I grabbed the counter to keep from falling. Mom dropped everything and wrapped her arms around me to guide me toward the exit. People stared as she basically carried me through the parking lot, while I tried to remember how to walk. My hands were still shaking when we got to the car, and I realized the triggers were getting worse. Not better, every flashing light felt like a threat now, and I couldn't make my brain understand the difference between danger and normal life. Darren started showing up at my locker between every single class the next day. He'd walk me to each room with his hand on my back, like I might collapse any second. At lunch, he checked on me 3 times to make sure I was eating enough. After school, he followed me to my car, even though his was on the other side of the lot. By Wednesday, I couldn't take it anymore and told him I needed space to breathe. He looked at me like I'd slapped him and said he was just trying to protect me. We stood there in the parking lot, yelling at each other for the first time since we'd started dating. He kept saying he couldn't lose me too, and I kept saying I wasn't made of glass. Neither of us won that fight, and we didn't talk for 2 days after. Someone leaked an email chain from the administration that Thursday, and it spread through the school like poison. The subject line said managing the paid leave situation, and every message talked about optics and liability, and media response, not one single email mentioned David's name or asked how the rest of us were doing. They called it an incident and discussed damage control like we were a PR problem to solve. The corporate language about a dead kid made me run to the bathroom and throw up. My hands were shaking as I forwarded it to Orla, who said it was exactly what we needed for the case. The school board meeting that night was packed with parents and reporters. We each got 2 minutes to speak, and I was third in line after Emily and Billy. My voice cracked when I said David's name, but I kept reading from my notes about what really happened. Behind me, I could hear parents whispering about mass hysteria and attention-seeking teenagers. One dad actually laughed when I described my seizure. I wanted to turn around and scream at them, but I kept going until my time ran out. Wren quickly stood up during the public comment period with a thick folder of papers. He proposed mandatory training for all substitute teachers about medical conditions and emergency protocols. The board members nodded and took notes and said they'd implement it within the next academic year. I wanted to scream that David needed help 6 weeks ago, not next September. The timeline felt like another slap in the face to everyone who'd been in that room. Orla helped us file a federal complaint with the Office for Civil Rights the following week. The woman on the phone was nice, but explained the investigation could take 18 months to complete. She used words like thorough and comprehensive while I stared at the calendar, thinking about David already in the ground. Justice delayed felt exactly like justice denied when the person who needed it most was gone. Every form we filled out felt pointless, but Orla said we needed the paper trail. At the school, kids started crossing the hallway when they saw me coming. Rumors spread that I wanted attention and got what I wanted, even though David paid the price. Someone wrote drama queen on my locker in permanent marker. The whispers followed me everywhere about how I destroyed Miss Blackwood's career for nothing. The physical symptoms hurt, but the social isolation hurt worse. Emily showed up at my house Sunday night with red eyes and snot running down her face. Her parents had given her an ultimatum about choosing her future over my vendetta. They said she was ruining her college prospects by associating with me. She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe and promised she wasn't abandoning me no matter what they threatened. We sat on my bed crying together until she had to go home. Mr. Peter pulled me aside after school on Monday and asked if we could talk privately. His hands were shaking as he admitted he should have looked closer through that window. He said he was haunted by what he didn't do and couldn't sleep anymore. The guilt in his eyes seemed real, but his remorse didn't bring David back. He asked what he could do to help, and I told him to testify at the hearing if we ever got one. Walsh getting slammed into lockers by Darren seems like a pretty direct message, but I wonder if Walsh actually understands why people are this angry, or if he thinks he's just reporting facts. Days later, the mail carrier handed me a thick envelope from the Office for Civil Rights, and my hands shook as I tore it open in the kitchen. The letter had an official government seal at the top and started with your complainant before listing our case number 2224, 1847 in bold letters. Mom read it over my shoulder while I scanned the formal language about how they'd received our complaint and would begin their investigation into the school district. It was just paperwork. But seeing that case number made everything feel more real and official. The next morning, I was spinning my locker combination when something fell out and hit my shoe. A small black USB drive with no label sat on the floor, and I picked it up wondering if someone dropped it by accident. During lunch, I plugged it into my laptop in the library, and a single video file appeared on the screen. The timestamp showed it was from that day in music class, and my stomach dropped as I clicked play. The footage was grainy hallway security camera video, but you could see straight through our classroom door window. For about 30 seconds, kids were diving under desks and someone was clearly seizing on the floor, while Miss Blackwood stood there doing nothing. The angle wasn't perfect, but you could make out the chaos and her complete lack of response to the medical emergency. I immediately texted Emily, who ran over from the cafeteria and watched it with me. 3 times before we called Orla, she answered on the second ring and told us not to share it with anyone, or even make copies, until she could verify where it came from. The chain of custody for evidence was critical, she explained, and we couldn't risk it being thrown out of court on a technicality. Someone inside the school was trying to help us, but we had no idea who had access to that footage, or why they'd chosen to give it to me anonymously. That afternoon, Mom drove me to the Pritchard house where David's mother was waiting in the living room with boxes of tissues and photo albums spread across the coffee table. She led me upstairs to David's room, which looked exactly like he'd left it that morning before school, with his bed half made and chemistry textbook open on his desk. His college applications were stacked next to his computer, and Northwestern was on top with the essay section completed, but never submitted. We sat on his bed and she held my hand while explaining that she'd hired her own lawyer to pursue a civil suit against the district and Miss Blackwood personally. She asked if I'd be willing to testify about what happened, and I nodded immediately, because David deserved justice, even if he wasn't here to see it. She showed me his journal, where he'd written about wanting to be a doctor and help kids with neurological conditions, like his own epilepsy that nobody knew about. The next day, Darren asked to talk privately after school, and we sat in his car in the parking lot while he stared at the steering wheel. He explained that his basketball scholarship to state was threatened because of his involvement in the incident, and the coach had warned him to stay quiet. His hands gripped the wheel as he promised he still loved me. but couldn't risk his entire future by being publicly involved in the fight against Miss Blackwood. I understood intellectually that college was his only way out of our town, but it still felt like he was choosing his future over doing what was right. He dropped me off at home, and I watched his car disappear, knowing our relationship would never be the same after this. 2 days later, Mom drove me to my first therapy appointment at a small office building downtown where the therapist had me fill out forms about my seizure triggers. She explained that we'd work on practical coping strategies for managing light sensitivity and stress that could trigger episodes. For homework, she gave me a worksheet to track my triggers throughout the week, which meant accepting that this was my new normal life. She taught me breathing exercises and showed me special glasses that could filter out certain light frequencies that might help prevent seizures. That weekend, I was checking social media when Emily called, screaming that someone had created a fake account using my name and profile picture. The account had posted screenshots of my medical records showing my epilepsy diagnosis and medication list with nasty comments about attention-seeking. By the time we reported it and got it taken down, the screenshots were already circulating through group chats and being reposted by anonymous accounts. Someone had violated HIPAA laws to get those records and was trying to humiliate me online. But we couldn't trace who was behind it. Orla suggested I take control of my own narrative by recording a video statement about what really happened that day. I set up my phone in my bedroom and spent 3 hours getting through the facts, without crying or showing emotion. The final version was 8 minutes of me calmly explaining the timeline of events and Miss Blackwood's specific actions that endangered multiple students. Posting it felt scary, but also gave me some control over how my story was being told instead of letting others twist it. Within 2 days, local news reporter Seamus Rader had contacted Orla asking for an interview about the incident. He ran a segment on the evening news showing my video statement and interviewing other parents whose kids were in the room that day. Tips started flooding into the news station about Miss Blackwood's behavior at her previous 2 schools, including an incident where she'd locked a diabetic student in a closet during a blood sugar crisis. The police finally scheduled formal interviews with all 23 students who were in the classroom, and Orla sat next to me as my attorney while I gave my statement. They asked detailed questions about every minute of that day, while a stenographer typed everything I said, and 2 detectives took notes. Miss Blackwood's lawyer had apparently advised her not to speak to investigators, which Orla said was basically an admission that she knew she'd done something wrong. 2 days later, the IT guy from the district called Orla's office while I was there going over paperwork, and she put him on speaker so we could both hear what he found. He pulled up the smartboard logs from that exact classroom on that exact day, and there it was, a YouTube video titled Extreme Strobe Light Challenge. 10 hours played from 11:42 a.m. to 11:54 a.m., exactly when everything happened. The log showed Miss Blackwood's login credentials, started the video, and set it to full screen mode at maximum brightness. And seeing that digital proof made my chest feel tight, even though it didn't bring David back or fix what happened to any of us. The next morning, a certified letter arrived at my house from the school district's lawyers offering me $50,000 if I signed their settlement agreement, which included a non-disclosure agreement that would stop me from ever talking about what happened publicly again. My mom read through the 20-page document at the kitchen table while I ate cereal, and she kept shaking her head at different parts, especially the section that said I couldn't post on social media, give interviews, or participate in any legal action against the district or Miss Blackwood personally. The money would cover most of my medical bills from the ambulance ride and emergency room visit, plus the new medication I had to take now because my seizures got worse after that day. But signing meant staying quiet about David dying, and Miss Blackwood still being on paid leave like nothing happened. 3 days later, Malik texted everyone to meet at his garage after school to talk about the settlements since apparently we all got the same offer. And when I showed up, there were already 12 kids there, with their letters spread out on his dad's workbench. Billy was pacing back and forth saying, we should all refuse because taking the money meant they won. While Sarah kept saying her family needed the money for her therapy bills, since she couldn't sleep without seeing David's face turning. Glue! The arguments got louder when someone's older brother who was in law school showed up and explained that if we took the settlements, we couldn't be witnesses in each other's cases or help David's parents with their wrongful death lawsuit, which made everyone start yelling about whether we owed it to David to refuse the money. Emily grabbed my arm and pulled me outside, where it was quieter, and said she thought anyone who took the money was basically saying David's life was worth $50,000. But then Walsh showed up and started arguing that we'd be stupid not to take guaranteed money when a trial could take years and we might lose anyway. My phone buzzed with a text from Darren saying I should just take the money and use it to move to a different school district where I could start fresh without everyone knowing me as the seizure girl. And when I showed it to Emily, she got mad and said that was exactly what the district wanted for us to disappear and let them sweep everything under the rug. The stress of being pulled between them made my handshake, and I had to sit down on the curb because I felt another seizure coming on, which scared everyone enough that Eker. She taught me to pause before answering, to only answer exactly what was asked without offering extra information, and to stay calm even when the questions made me angry. Which was hard when she asked things like whether I'd ever exaggerated my symptoms before, or if I enjoyed the attention I got from having seizures. We even planned what to do if I had a seizure during the deposition with Orla, making sure the court reporter knew to note everything that happened, and having my medical alert information ready in case opposing counsel tried to claim I was faking. The morning of Miss Blackwood's deposition, I wasn't allowed in the room, but Orla told me about it afterward. How Miss Blackwood sat there in a navy suit, insisting that we were all performing, and that teenage girls especially were prone to mass hysteria and attention-seeking behavior. She actually brought up her sister's daughter, who supposedly faked seizures for 2 years before her parents stopped enabling her, and miraculously, she was cured, using this as proof that she knew we were all faking, and that's why she felt confident using the strobe light as exposure therapy. When they asked her about David, she said he was probably just caught up in the group hysteria, and that his death was an unfortunate coincidence, but not related to her actions. Which made me so angry my hands shook, and I had to leave Orla's office to walk around the block 3 times before I could calm down. The next week was Mr. Peters' deposition, and this time, Orla let me watch through the glass door, and I saw him break down crying when they asked him about looking through our classroom window that day. He admitted he saw Miss Blackwood give him a thumbs up, and he assumed everything was fine because she seemed calm, but he didn't really look at us students or notice the chaos happening behind her. And now he couldn't sleep because he kept thinking about how he could have stopped everything if he'd just opened the door. His tears seemed real, and he kept saying he was sorry. But sorry didn't bring David back, and sorry didn't fix my brain that now had seizures twice as often as before that day. And I noticed Miss Blackwood never said sorry, not even once. The last deposition that week was Di Paxton, the district's superintendent, who spent 3 hours explaining how the district's substitute teacher training was comprehensive, but that Miss Blackwood was an aberration who acted outside the scope of her training, basically trying to throw her under the bus while protecting the district from liability. He kept using phrases like isolated incident and couldn't have been prevented, while his lawyer nodded along, and when they asked him about David, he called it a tragic outcome, but insisted the district followed all protocols in their response, even though it took the ambulance 15 minutes to arrive, because no one called 911 immediately, since Miss Blackwood had locked the door and taken our phones. 3 weeks later, Walsh sat in the lawyer's office for his deposition, and I watched through the glass door as he kept looking down at his hands. The lawyer asked him about that day in music class, and he started talking about our grandmother, how she'd been telling him since we were kids that I was faking everything for attention. He said she'd call him every week to warn him about my manipulation, tactics, and how I'd fooled all the doctors. She'd send him articles about Munchausen syndrome and tell him stories about times I'd supposedly pretended to be sick to get out of family events. The lawyer wrote everything down, while Walsh explained how grandmother had convinced him that helping me would just enable my behavior. He admitted she'd been poisoning his mind against me for years, but said it didn't excuse what he did. Back at the school the next morning, everything felt different. Some kids came up to me in the hallway to say they were sorry for not doing more that day. Malik brought me a card signed by half the basketball team, but other kids rolled their eyes when they saw me coming. I heard whispers about how we were being dramatic, and how David would have died anyway, because of his condition. One girl said we were just trying to get money from the lawsuit. The cafeteria split into 2 groups, those wearing purple ribbons for David, and those who thought we were overreacting. Fights broke out in the parking lot between kids arguing about whether Miss Blackwood deserved what was happening to her. 2 months passed before we got the court date. The judge listened to all the testimony and looked at the medical records and the video Billy's phone had captured before Miss Blackwood took it. She granted the preliminary injunction requiring every staff member to complete seizure response training within 30 days. But she denied our request to have Miss Blackwood fired immediately. She said due process had to be followed, and Miss Blackwood had rights too. The lawyer explained that this was actually good news, but it didn't feel like it when I knew she was still getting her full salary. Another month went by before the district finally offered to settle. They created a memorial fund in David's name worth $200,000 for epilepsy research. They promised to overhaul their substitute teacher training program and require medical emergency certification for all staff. Miss Blackwood agreed to resign, with her teaching license under review by the state board. The district's lawyer kept calling it a fair resolution, but David's parents just sat there crying. My neurologist appointment that week didn't go well. The test showed my seizure threshold had dropped significantly from all the stress. She said I'd need to increase my medication and avoid any triggers, including flashing lights, lack of sleep, and emotional stress. That's when I knew I had to end things with Darren. We sat in his car after school, and I explained that I couldn't handle a relationship on top of everything else. He kept saying he understood, but his eyes were red, and he wouldn't look at me. We'd been together for 2 years, but my brain couldn't take any more pressure. Emily helped me start a disability advocacy group at the school the following week. 20 kids showed up to the first meeting in the library. We talked about creating buddy systems for students with medical conditions and pushing for better emergency protocols. One girl with diabetes shared how a teacher had refused to let her check her blood sugar during a test. A boy with Tourette's talked about getting detention for his tics. We made plans to present to the school board and started working on a petition for mandatory disability awareness training. Having something productive to focus on helped with the anger that kept building up inside me. And I went to David's grave on a Saturday morning when the cemetery was empty. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or Miss Blackwood or any of it. We just sat on the grass next to his headstone and watched the clouds move across the sky. His parents had chosen a quote about light never truly going out, but just changing form. Null grass out of the ground, one blade at a time, while I traced his name carved into the granite. After an hour, we walked back to her car without saying anything, because there wasn't anything to say. Some things can't be fixed with words or money or justice. The next week, I spent every evening writing an article for the local paper about what happened. I didn't attack anyone personally or use inflammatory language. I just laid out the facts about the systemic failures that led to David's death. I wrote about the lack of proper substitute training, the absence of medical emergency protocols, and the culture that dismisses student medical needs as attention-seeking. I ended it with specific proposals for change, including mandatory medical training, clear reporting procedures, and accountability measures. My voice stayed steady as I read it to my parents before sending it in, not because I was healed, but because I'd learned to carry the damage without letting it consume me completely. Thanks for letting me wander through all this with you. It's been such a journey to share together until we meet again. And hey, like the video!